I want to give us one little story today, and it's going to be a little shorter message. One quick story that connects with what we've been doing over the last 5 weeks. So if you've been with us, we've been tracking with the story of the Israelites as they leave Egypt, and they're on their way to this future. And there would be some ups and downs, but they would have to take one big step of faith after another. And so they cross the sea. They learn to follow God in the desert. They go to the mountain. God begins to change their character. He gives them a project to do together. They build the tabernacle. They lead together. But all of that great big story that we love here at Cornerstone, partly because of our confluence element, in many ways, it all started with a single conversation between God and a man named Moses. And this is also one of our favorite stories, because Moses is so much like us. He's an unlikely candidate to speak on behalf of God and to lead God's people. In Exodus chapter 3, we see this conversation beginning, and I have a few of the verses to kind of remind you of this. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, this is speaking of Moses, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said to God, "Here I am." So the conversation about living the bigger story always starts with God moving towards us, inviting us in. Verse 7, we see what God is thinking about. He's seen the misery of his people in Egypt. I've heard their suffering, and it's been long enough. So in verse 9, he says, "I've heard the cries of the Israelites. They've reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, so here's where the conversation starts. It's actually a negotiation. How many of you have ever negotiated with God? Well, we're really good at it. We rarely win. He doesn't win here. But he said, "Are you sure? Why would Pharaoh ever listen to me?" And this is just the first of many comebacks to God that Moses would present to him of why he's the wrong person. So here's what's happening. God is giving him a plan, a vision. He's giving him a greater purpose to live out in his life. He's to be the messenger to Pharaoh. He's to lead the Israelites on this long journey. And Moses is thinking, this is not what I want. He's so much like us. Here you have a guy whose life is marked by his past mistakes and his past shame. And here you have a guy that is full of insecurity and doubt, and he feels weak and incompetent. So no wonder he's arguing with God. There has to be someone better. But God does the choosing, and God does the calling. And so he's calling him into this big story. And God usually wins. Chapter 4, verse 2. The negotiation's going on for a while, and then they get to this moment. This is what I want us to think about today. The Lord said to him, after another one of Moses' questions, "Why me?" The Lord said to him, "What's in your hand?" "A staff," Moses replied. And then the Lord said, in the beginning of verse 3, "Throw it to the ground." And we'll see here in a moment that God does something with that staff that's thrown to the ground, but I want us to focus on this right now. When God calls you into anything, when he wants to use us, and by the way, this conversation that God has with Moses that we have the privilege of reading about is something he wants to have with us all the time. When you begin to follow Jesus, he begins to ask the question, will you let me use you? Will you join me in what's happening? Will you be a person that's a blessing to others? Will you let me use you? This conversation starts this way. And if the answer is yes, guess what God will do? He will always use who you are right now in the moment, even though you're a changing person. He will always use what you have in the moment, not what you don't have. And he will always use what you can do and not what you can't do. So we've used examples of this over the years. David killed a giant, not with someone else's sword or skill, but with his own sling, right? God will use what you have as you say yes to him and to be used. So God asked Moses, he said, "Hey, you've got some problems. You're telling me all the things you can't do, all the things you don't have. Of course, you aren't a leader. You don't have an army. You're not good with a weapon. What is it that you have, Moses? A staff. What is it that's in your hand? A shepherd's staff. But it happens to be his staff. And it means something to him. Each day, over the previous many years, when he would go out to work and he would work in the field and take care of those sheep, guess what would come with him? It would be his staff in his hand. And that staff was used to guide the sheep. It was used to protect the sheep. It was used to help him navigate the rocky terrain that he was walking on. It was his staff. And God says, what is it that's in your hand? It's my staff, not just a stick. It's my shepherd's staff. See, God will use what is true about you. Now, I want you to catch this. I want to connect this idea of the staff to a whole bunch of things in his life because it represents how God uses us. God will use everything in your life. Nothing is wasted if it's all thrown down for him. So that staff for Moses, at certain times in his life, or certain days, or maybe certain moments during the day, would have represented his shadow. If you remember the story of his past, he was a prince in Egypt. He had just about everything a person could want. But he had lived with this kind of identity crisis because he was an Israelite that had been pulled out of the river and had been raised in Pharaoh's house. And he lived with this conflict inside. And years before, when he was a young man, he attacked someone and killed someone and then ran away in shame. So every day he would have looked at that staff and said, I have the staff of a shepherd, but this was not my choice. This is the result of some bad mistakes that I've made in the past. He would have been reminded that he's not welcome anywhere anymore because of that staff. That staff would have also represented what I mentioned earlier, his insecurities. The present view of yourself. I'm only a shepherd, which was not a good job back then. In fact, it's neat to read Egyptian literature. The worst job a person could ever have as an Egyptian was a tender of sheep. So he goes from this high place, he has the worst job. He also, we know, has a stutter. He has a hard time with his words. So he's got all these things that are causing his insecurities. That staff represents all of those. Guess what happens when you give your life to God? He uses all of it. Your mistakes, your regrets, your weakness, your insecurities, whatever it would be. But you know what else that staff represented? It just didn't represent a shadow. It represented the light or the grace that was true of him. So it wasn't just a stick, it was a tool, right? That this tool is something that he had used to protect and to lead sheep. And it represented his skill. It represented his experience. And he didn't know that leading a group of several million people around a desert would kind of be like herding cats or herding sheep. He had the perfect training. God would use the little bit of experience that he had. God would also use, I actually like this about Moses. It often doesn't get brought up because we spend time just talking about how his failures and his insecurities and all of those are there and they show up in the conversation with God. But he also had some really neat things about his personality. There was this part of Moses that had courage to stand up and protect others. So we already have record of him protecting people who couldn't care for themselves, couldn't protect themselves. He's a guardian. And God would use that. That's part of the light that God would use. God would even use his past knowledge of a different culture. So there wasn't an Israelite on earth at the time that understood not only the Egyptian political system more than Moses did, but there wasn't an Israelite that understood the gods of the Egyptians more than Moses did. God knew exactly what he was doing when he was picking him. He was using all of his knowledge, all of his experience, all of his tools, even all of his possessions. See, that staff also represented the way he took care of himself and his family. He took care of sheep. They traded their sheep. They used it to live on, to eat, to clothe themselves. It was their livelihood. It was the meaning of their possessions. So even though to us it looks like an ordinary shepherd stick, it would be used in exceptional ways placed in God's hands. That staff would make an impact in the court of the Pharaoh. There wasn't a more powerful place on earth at the time than Pharaoh's court in Egypt. And that staff would make an impact because it had been given back to God. Ordinary things given back to God can lead to wonders. This is just a message that Jesus gives us, the scriptures give us over and over again. So in chapter 4, verse 3, we see one of the examples of God doing wonders with it. He says, throw it to the ground. So Moses threw it on the ground, and then my worst nightmare breaks out. It became a snake. I don't like snakes. And he doesn't either. He ran from it. But then the Lord said, reach out your hand. Even the news is getting worse. Reach out your hand and take that snake by the tail. Good idea, God. So he reached out and he grabbed the snake, and what is it? It becomes a staff again. Now, we're going to turn in commitment cards. Nothing special is going to happen with that card like that today. All right? If it does, we're leaving. If the card becomes a snake, we're all out of here. But it's an exaggeration of a true point. Anything placed in God's hands is not just that simple thing itself. His power, his wonder is joined with it. So that's why the staff would stay a prevalent part of this story. Exodus chapter 4, when Moses is getting ready to go to Egypt, look what it says in verse 20. He gets his family together, and he grabs the staff of God in his hand, and he begins to go back. Exodus chapter 14, it's the staff that was raised and placed in the water when the sea parted. You can read about all these amazing things that happened. The staff was a part of all of those things. It represented what Moses was willing to give to God, and God taking that and doing exceptional things with it. And then in Exodus chapter 17, when Israel's getting ready to fight a battle, he said, I'm going to go up on top of the mountain tomorrow, and I'm going to hold my hands in the air, and the staff of God will be lifted high. So that's what happens. God takes what we have, and he uses it. Now, we're always faced with this choice, and the conversation continues. Can I use you? Can I use you? Can I use you? God points for us the certain way that leads to life, but it's our choice to walk that path or not. Let me tell you about a couple people here at Cornerstone that just live this out all the time, and it would be easy not to. I have a friend, his name is Chris, and he's given God his shadow in his past. About as much as anyone I've ever met. See, Chris was an alcoholic for many years and was addicted to certain prescription medicine and nearly ruined his life, almost lost all of his relationships, and found himself in a place where he was getting ready to die, or, it was just a bad place. And so he actually went down the recovery road. This is probably like the 10th or 12th time, and this time at work, God really spoke to him and worked in his life, and there were people that helped him. Today, he is the most prominent sponsor for people dealing with any form of addiction that I know of in the entire city of Boulder, and we keep him busy just with the people and the family members in Cornerstone that need help. He never says no when I say, will you meet with this person? I mean, he's the one I go to right away all the time, and he never says no. He's given God his shadow. He's given God his past, and God is using it. God uses it. We have other people here, and Chris also has his own light that he uses, but we have other people here that get to use their light to be used by God. So many of you know Jenny Simpson. So Jenny is the most accomplished U.S. women's miler in American history. And she's the most famous distance runner in America right now. And she'll be here later this evening. Before the last Olympics, before the 2016 Olympics, she asked to have some meetings with me. And so we spent some time that spring having some conversations. And she was working through some just performance anxiety around the races and conflict with teammates and coaches and just normal things that people deal with. But in the midst of the conversation, she said, we're in a really, really competitive environment. Should I just be thinking about competing? And of course, what's the answer when you're following Jesus? No, right? Winning, success is not the only bottom line. And I said, Jenny, God has you in that place to use your influence for others that are looking to you so you can point them to Jesus, but you are also there to be a great teammate. And so we spent some time talking about what it would mean to be a great teammate in the midst of competing against your teammates to make these limited spots. That summer before the Olympics, she ran at the Olympic trials in Oregon. And if I remember it right, Jenny took first. There was only a few spots for our girls to make the Olympic teams. I think there was 3 spots. And Jenny was running the race against some other ladies that she just competed against and also some of her friends. Well, one of the friends that she had really been reaching out to over the last few months, after Jenny had crossed the finish line and the second place girl had crossed the finish line, this girl comes up and there's just this mob of ladies as they cross the line together, and Jenny's teammate falls across the finish line, and no one knows who got that third last spot to qualify for the Olympics. And it was her teammate. And they were all waiting for the results on the screen, and when they saw it, if you watch the video, and you can find it on YouTube, Jenny celebrates more for her friend than herself. And afterwards, she said that was the greatest joy of that race. To be that kind of friend, to be that kind of teammate. See, God will use whatever it is that you have, that we have, if we give it to him. And so a question that we need to ask ourselves, what's been placed in our hand? What's been given to us that we might steward? Because all of life is meant to be a sacred stewardship of everything God gives us. And that is meant to be lived with vision and purpose. Now I need to start kind of wrapping up here in a little bit. But let me read you another passage from Jesus. Jesus said it this way. He used a beautiful illustration, Matthew chapter 5. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. If we wake up daily with this attitude of, God, I want you to use me, guess what stops? This constant wondering about what I'm supposed to do with my life. This constant questioning about my own personal value. This obsession with my own needs. This constant being offended because not everyone feels what I feel. Guess what happens? All those things kind of become less and less. They take care of themselves. Why? Because we've replaced those narratives with a bigger, better one, which is God's kingdom and joining him and letting his kingdom come in my heart and being a part of what he's doing. So to ask the question, what is in your hand, actually becomes an answer to many of the big questions that we have in life. This is the path to joy. We all get to do this no matter what we do. One of the problems, at least for me, that happens when I have conversations with people and we talk about calling and living out and being used by God is they look at me and say, well, Brian, you're being used by God because you're a pastor and you know exactly what you're supposed to do. And I quickly say, hey, I got called into ministry really early. I was 16, which I don't like how it worked out. How does a 16-year-old deal with that? But that's when the Lord called me. And a lot of people say, well, that's when you got your purpose. No, it wasn't. That's not when I got my purpose. It was in middle school. When I first gave my heart to Jesus and said, I will follow you, that he said, I want your heart to be for me and for others. See, that's when the mission began. This just happens to be one of the ways I get to express and serve God and love others. You have a number of ways that you get to. When you say yes to him, guess what happens? He will start meddling in your life, saying, can I use you? Can I use you? Will you be used? We're people just like Moses. In fact, he's probably worse than us. All right, let's just put it that way. Not that it's a competition, but he's a bigger mess than any of you. And I know many of you, all right? If God can use him, what's in your hand, he can use us. And so in a few minutes, you're going to take out your commitment card, and this is going to represent a thoughtful stewardship of your financial resources. This is not meant to be the end of your calling into mission. This is just one of many expressions of the way that God wishes to use you. I hope you know that. This is small compared to the many, 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 many things God will call us into, the type of people he'll ask us to be, the extent that he wants us to pour our hearts out for others. It will never, ever stop. But here's what he promises. Every step of faith, every time you pour out your heart, guess what he does? He says, I am there with you, and I will fill what is being emptied. Whatever you give away, I will return. And it's not a promise that it's going to turn out a certain way for us, but God will continue to pour his love and his grace and his care into our lives so that we can give it to other people. So this is representing one of the things that's in your hand, but not the only thing. I want to show you a video. So we've let you know that we've had a number of people make pre-commitments already. And we just want to show you a video of just how special this moment is. And so we want you to see this. Let's show that.
I'm really excited because we get a new future, and God, I wrote this on the paper. God had his turn to create, and I feel like it's our turn now to create our church.
Cornerstone's been our home for our family. our spiritual place to find and experience God.
So we've been to Cornerstone for over 20 years. We've been here before we even had the building. We were here throughout the whole renovation.
God brought me here a long time ago, and it's been home ever since through lots of phases of life and that continue to evolve each and every day. Good, bad, celebrations, grieving, and it's home. God's here.
Cornerstone means to me being a part of a community here and getting to know new people and worshiping the Lord as a community and being with others around you and just feeling the Lord's presence.
It's my family, it's my friends, my support group, the people who have been with me for 20-something years, walked through life with me.
Cornerstone has been a place that we feel like our family has been accepted, we could grow. We immediately felt like we were part of a bigger family when we started coming here.
I'm really excited to give because I feel like it could really help people, and I just, when I give, I feel it's really a real joy that I love to have.
We feel like it's really important to be a part of the future of Cornerstone and a part of their vision.
I think it's very important that we have a community that everyone is welcome in.
I showed up because I'm in. I believe God's going to do some great things in the near future, and I want to show my support of what God's doing.
It's just a celebration for us to be able to just be a part of this congregation in the next big step.
The last 20 years have been incredible, and I can't imagine what the next 20 will be like.
I've never been a part of anything like this. First of all, I was curious of what it would be like and had no idea how worshipful it would be and how unifying it would be, I believe, to get believers here together to be of one mind and one heart and one purpose. And I feel like that's what happened tonight as we worshiped God and as we committed to support this new endeavor.
I think I'm most proud of the kids. 70 of them have already turned in a card. There'll be more to come. Many of those kids, you can put up that other slide, they're actually moving up kind of, we call this the giving ladder. They're first-time givers, some of those kids. There are other kids that are actually learning how to be faithful givers. That 10% that God says it's the place to start. We actually have other kids that are making really meaningful sacrifices above and beyond. Now remember, the amount is not what matters as much as the intent and what's in the heart, what God compels a person to give. And so we're really proud of our kids. A bunch of smiles those nights with them. It didn't take much to convince them or to help them understand. I think there's something neat about a kid's heart when they're told, hey, you can make a difference. And so we're really, really proud of them. This represents the next step for many of you, where you will come in as a family. We just ask that you take your next step. And we trust God with those results. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to worship together. We have a lot of time here as we finish the service, and we're going to be able to turn in our cards. And so I'm going to give you a moment to just pray here in a second, and you can reflect and maybe hear from the Lord. This is what we're going to ask you to do. A number of you have already made a pre-commitment. We actually want you to write your name on a card and participate right now. So I turned my first card in January, but I've been looking forward to this moment of together for several months. And so we want everyone who has or is making a commitment to turn in a card. And so you have the commitment cards at the seat. You're tired of seeing them, so let's get rid of them, okay? You're going to work through your card. You might do it right now. Maybe you already have. You've prepared. And when you're ready, we want you to come up to one of the stations as we worship, so you're just free to do this yourself. So there's 3 up here in the front. There's 1 in the balcony. There's 2 in the back corner. You're welcome as you come up to place your card in the box. And then I just ask you to pray a simple little blessing on everyone else's commitment as you do that. There's also index cards that you can take back. And we did this at Advanced Commitment Night. It was really fun. We want you to write a blessing for a person that will be just like you someday sitting in your seat. So the next you. Remember what it was like when you walked in here. Remember what it is that you needed. Remember the time that God broke through in your life. I want you to write a blessing for a person who will need the same thing someday. And then we have the blueprints of the building, and there's some prayers that have been written on them, and you're welcome to just take one of the markers and stay up there and write a blessing. So we want you to participate, not just in the cards, but we want you to pray. And we want to saturate our church and our future and everything that we're doing with prayer. And so that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so 3 stations up here, the 2 in the back, 1 in the balcony. And you're able to do it on your own, and let's all participate together. I've got my card right here ready to go as well. So, all right, let's bow our heads together. And I want to give you just a moment to hear from the Lord. Some of you, I've heard from you that God keeps speaking to you and you're actually making a change on your card. Let's let God be in charge. Father, for several weeks now, we've been praying that you would speak to us as families and couples and individuals. We ask for that again right now. We thank you for what you've said. We thank you for the direction you've already given so many people. But we ask that you would keep leading all day long today. Thank you for a great problem. Thank you for a church that is full of life, that wants more of it. Thank you for the way you provide for us. Thank you for the joy of giving. Thank you for community. Thank you, God, that we can do more together than we ever could on our own. Father, we bless this time. We bless our future as a church. We will always say, Father, your way, not ours. So keep us listening. We ask the Holy Spirit to move right now. You would be here, God. We pray this in your name. And let us worship now in a number of different ways, through our words and our singing, but also our giving. We want to honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.